This is Between the Brackets, a Mediawiki podcast, episode 24, December 25th, 2018. Hello and welcome to Between the Brackets. I'm Yaron Koren. And this is it. It's the final episode of the year, 2018. And for this episode, there's no guest. It's just me talking. I thought about doing a clip show, but really the BTB Digest episodes are for that. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the year that's passed, and which has been the first year of the podcast. So this is the 24th episode. It started in February 2018, this podcast, so it's been almost a full year. There have been 22 guests on the podcast, including core MediaWiki developers, extension developers, consultants, administrators, MediaWiki users, authors, and of course people who fit into more than one of those categories. It's been a pretty impressive geographic distribution. I've had guests from 11 countries. That's the USA, Canada, Spain, the UK, Germany, Austria, Netherlands, Finland, Norway, Poland, and India. There are a few more countries that could potentially be added to that list based on where people have lived before, but I didn't count those. And impressive distribution, I think, within the U.S. as well. We've had guests from California, Texas, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Massachusetts. And New Jersey, if you count me. So pretty much spanning the coasts and a little bit in the middle of the country as well. Not everyone I've asked has agreed to come on the show, if you're wondering about that, although most people have. The acceptance rate has been somewhat higher for people from the so-called Enterprise MediaWiki community than from the Wikimedia Foundation, which is not that surprising. But what has been a pleasant surprise is how gracious most people have been in agreeing to come on the show. So, it's been almost a full year now. I have to say it's been a very rewarding experience doing this podcast. I've mentioned a few times that I see this podcast as sort of an oral history of MediaWiki and the development of MediaWiki. For most of the guests, it's the first time they've been on a podcast or even been interviewed for something, I think, or at least for a substantial minority, which is maybe to be expected. But on the other hand, it's odd that MediaWiki, the software powering the world's fourth or fifth most popular website, not to mention tens of thousands of other smaller websites, gets so little publicity. So in a sense, I'm really just trying to rectify an imbalance here, I feel like. So that's been great, and it's also nice to it's a nice way to get to meet people. I looked at the list, and about 2/3 of the guests on the show are people I knew already in some capacity or other, whether it's people I've worked with or just people I've exchanged some emails with or people I've met in person. But about 1/3 were people I'd never met or talked to, other than maybe some code review at some point. I can't be sure about that. So it's great to make new connections and find out what all these people whose names I've seen are doing these days or have done. And in all the cases, actually, I've learned things about people I didn't know before, even people that in some cases I've known for 10 years. One surprising aspect has been that I've learned quite a bit about audio engineering, actually. If you're wondering about my setup, I'm speaking right now into a Blue Yeti microphone, which is kind of a cliche for podcasters, from what I understand. And then I do my recording and audio engineering on open source software called Audacity, which I highly recommend. A lot of people use it. I think the majority of podcasters use it. I think it's used for some music production as well. So just from dealing with Audacity, I've learned a lot about stuff like compression, equalizing, noise reduction, splicing, which is not to say I'm an expert on any of these things. There's still quite a bit more to learn, but I definitely understand more about the whole process. And I guess I feel more of a kinship now with audio engineers and music producers, people who deal with audio. Even though this podcast is just people talking, except for the music at the beginning and the end, I've still become more conscious, I think, of all the choices that can be made in the recording and the audio processing steps, and all the trade-offs involved. If you have high compression, it makes everything more audible and easy to hear, but at the same time, it gives it a kind of an artificial sound. So that you have to balance those things out, that kind of thing. It's pretty interesting stuff. I'm definitely less nervous now than I was when I started this out. The first few episodes, I actually didn't think it would happen because it's not that I've never done performing or public speaking. When I was younger, I did a lot of performing, whether music or acting. And I've done a lot of public speaking in the last 10 years, definitely. But somehow when that record light went on, I just, my heart started pounding. My mind went blank. At least in the first 4 or 5 episodes, it was really pretty bad, the beginning part of each episode. And that part's still a little bit of a problem. My mind sometimes still goes blank sometimes, but it's definitely gotten better, and I hope that continues to improve. Maybe by the 5th year, I'll really have my act together. So on that note, I definitely recommend podcasting to anyone if you're considering it, or just are someone who's a fan of podcasts. I really have enjoyed this process and found it quite rewarding. It's definitely been helpful for me to have a niche, which is MediaWiki, as a topic, so that I'm not just talking about sports or national politics or ketogenics or whatever the popular podcast topics are. But there are a lot of niches out there, whether it's some other software application or open source software or technology or your area of the world or the people you know. Whatever it is, it's great to find that kind of niche and talk to people or cover topics that haven't been covered before. It's a big world out there. My one advice is to get a good microphone, which I didn't have in the first few episodes. You can tell if you listen to those, but that's really the key thing, I think. Everything else you can sort of learn. So yeah, I do plan to keep doing this, and hopefully 2 weeks from now there'll be a new guest, and we'll see how it goes. So on that note, I have no idea for sure, but I'm guessing that there are some people who are wondering if they're going to be invited on the podcast, whether they're excited about it or dreading it or just curious. I currently have a list of about 35 people that I want to have on the show at some point. So if you're wondering if you're going to be invited, there's a reasonable chance you will be. Although, given the somewhat relaxed schedule of this podcast, that might not happen for a year or more. If you want to be on the show, by the way, feel free to just email me. I'm at yaron57@gmail.com. That's yaron57@gmail.com. There have already been 2 people who have asked to be on the podcast so far, and one has already been on, so I guess your chances are 1 in 2 of getting invited. Though I do hope to have the other person on at some point. Anyway, if you want to be on the show and you get a little tinge of disappointment each time an episode rolls around and you're not on it, please do email me. I fully know what it's like to not get asked for things. I'm still an outsider to the MediaWiki community to some extent, even though I wrote the book on it and have done development and host conferences and so forth, just because I don't do core MediaWiki development. Though I think hosting this podcast has raised my profile. But if someone else were hosting this podcast, like a core MediaWiki developer or someone who works for the Wikimedia Foundation, I think there's a reasonable chance I wouldn't get invited on. So by that same token, I'm hardly an expert on who matters within the MediaWiki community. All I can do is use my sense of things and my virtual Rolodex, and in a few cases I've asked around a little bit. But I hope no one is offended if they haven't been invited on. And again, if you want to come on the show, please do just email me. It makes my life easier to know who's willing or even excited to come on the show. Speaking of contacting me, it would be great to get more feedback on this show. I can see the statistics, but beyond that, I really don't know what people are thinking unless they tell me. Which guests have you liked? What kind of topics do you want to hear more about? Should the discussion be more conversational or more sort of pre-scripted like it is now? The danger with a more conversational show is that it can meander and drag on for longer than people might want to hear, but maybe that's fine. Related to that, how is the length of these episodes? Usually they're about 30 to 60 minutes, but they could be shorter or longer. And what do you think about those digest recap episodes? So if you have any thoughts on what you like or how things should change, please email me. Again, that's yaron57@gmail.com. Or for those, you can comment directly on the website, betweenthebrackets.libsyn.com, libsyn.com. So anyway, that's the show. Short and sweet. Thanks for listening. This show comes out on Christmas Day, so Merry Christmas to those of you celebrating it. If you don't celebrate Christmas, chances are that your holiday happened already. But in any case, Happy New Year to everyone, and I'll see you in 2019.